If you agree that sometimes the quietest lives hide the loudest truths, then like and subscribe, because what I'm about to tell you didn't begin on a battlefield or in a briefing room, but in the back of a roadside diner where the sink was always piled high and the air always smelled faintly of burnt coffee and fryer oil. A place so ordinary that no one who walked in could ever imagine it as the stage where history would crack back open. And yet that's exactly where Claire Donovan found herself. At 28, sleeves rolled, apron stained, her reflection blurred in the sheen of greasy water as she scrubbed plates stacked higher than her shoulders, pretending that this was all she was, all she'd ever be, just another woman who hadn't made it, who hadn't chased enough ambition, who was just trying to stay afloat on tips and a paycheck that barely covered rent. And the customers who came through the diner never guessed otherwise, never guessed that the girl with the tired eyes and the clipped answers once lived a life where every second mattered, where one wrong step meant a bullet, where silence wasn't indifference but survival. And she carried that silence still, wrapped tight around her like a second skin, because Claire had learned the hard way that talking too much, remembering too openly, only hurt worse when you lost someone. And she had lost too many already, so she scrubbed and rinsed and stacked, keeping her head down. And her coworkers sometimes joked about how jumpy she was, how she could catch a glass before it slipped, how she always knew when a stranger walked in even before the bell above the door rang. But they dismissed it as quirk, maybe trauma from some bad relationship, because no one in that town could imagine that the dishwasher in the corner once carried a call sign instead of a name, Dragonfly, a word spoken only in secure channels, a name tethered to missions whispered about, but never acknowledged, and she thought she had buried that part of herself when she left it all behind, shoved a passport and a burner phone into a shoebox under her bed, and told herself she was done, that at 28 she could still start over, could still live like everyone else, ordinary, forgettable, safe. But memory has claws and it waits, and every night as she scrubbed the last pan, Claire could feel it lurking, the weight of names, the faces of people she couldn't save, and sometimes she would wake in her tiny apartment drenched in sweat, thinking she had heard the word Phoenix whispered again, that cursed protocol that ended everything. But she told herself it was only a dream, that she was free. And then came the night when the diner was nearly empty, the cook slumped in the back, a trucker nursing his coffee at the counter, rain streaking the windows in lines that blurred the outside world, and the old radio perched above the sink. One of those battered things that seemed held together by tape and memory, crackled louder than usual, static rattling the pans, and she might have ignored it if not for what followed. A voice, sharp and clipped, weaving through the static like a knife through cloth. Dragonfly, Protocol Phoenix initiated. The dish slipped in her hand, nearly shattering, her chest seizing as though someone had just named her aloud, because no one here knew that name. No one here could even guess what it meant. And yet there it was, bouncing off the tiled walls of a diner where no secrets should have lived. And Claire froze, her eyes snapping to the windows, to the trucker at the counter, to the sedan outside idling too long under the rain. And she knew instantly this wasn't a coincidence. It couldn't be, because Phoenix wasn't just any word. Phoenix was the kind of word that woke graves, that meant the past wasn't past anymore. And in that moment she realized her carefully built life, her apron, her double shifts, her silence, had been nothing but a fragile disguise waiting to be torn away, because the Phoenix was calling her back, dragging Dragonfly out of the shadows whether she wanted it or not. And for the first time in years, Claire felt the world tilt under her feet, reminding her that you can wash dishes forever, but you can never scrub the blood out of your own hands. The voice lingered in her skull long after the static faded, as if someone had whispered it directly into her ear. And for a long moment Claire couldn't move, couldn't breathe, just stood there with her hands submerged in soapy water gone cold, staring at her own reflection in the steel sink. Dragonfly, that name she thought she had buried beneath the rubble of another life, rising again like it had been waiting just beneath the surface. And then instinct, hardwired, impossible to forget, slammed back into her body, her pulse snapping into the rhythm of training, her gaze darting to every corner of the diner, cataloging exits, assessing the trucker's stance, the sedan still idling outside with its windows fogged, too still for too long, and the ordinary world she had wrapped herself in tore away like paper, leaving only the operative beneath, raw and exposed, because those words weren't random, they couldn't be. Not when Phoenix was a protocol so buried in black ink it might as well not have existed, a plan reserved for the kind of scenarios no one wanted to imagine. And hearing it now meant that something catastrophic was either already happening or about to, and that she, Dragonfly, had been pulled back and whether she had chosen it or not. So she dried her trembling hands on the apron and forced her breathing to steady, forced her movements to slow, to appear normal, though every nerve in her body screamed otherwise, and she carried the last stack of dishes to the shelf as if nothing had changed, while in her mind a clock had begun ticking, counting down to something she couldn't yet name. But she knew enough to understand that her life as Claire the dishwasher was finished, because once Phoenix was invoked, the past didn't stay in the shadows. It consumed everything. And as she pretended to mop the floor, her eyes flicked to the cook door, to the exit, mapping contingencies, because she could already feel the eyes on her, unseen but heavy, the kind that used to follow her in foreign streets when she wore a different name. And when the trucker finally paid and left, and the diner fell into silence broken only by the low hum of the refrigerator, Claire stood frozen, watching the sedan, her hand hovering near her apron pocket where no weapon waited, only a pen and a crumpled tip receipt, and the powerlessness hit her harder than the memory itself, because she had stripped herself of tools, of readiness, had chosen to disarm in pursuit of being ordinary. And now that choice could cost her. Could cost the cook dozing in the back, the waitress who'd gone home early, anyone unlucky enough to be near her when the past came knocking. So she forced herself to finish the shift, every second drawn taut, waiting for the door to open, for the black sedan's engine to roar to life. But nothing came, nothing except the echo of those words crawling through her mind. Dragonfly. Protocol Phoenix initiated. And when the clock struck midnight, she hung up her apron as if she were still just a worker, just a 28-year-old lost in the grind. But her chest burned with the knowledge that everything had already shifted, that the storm had begun. And so she walked out into the rain with her head low, her shoulders hunched, but her eyes alive again, scanning shadows, scanning rooftops, the old habits flooding back like they had never left. And when she reached her apartment, she didn't flick on the light, just slid inside and bolted the lock, heart hammering as she knelt beside the bed and pulled out the shoebox she hadn't touched in 3 years, the one lined with relics of the life she had sworn never to return to. And the sight of it made her stomach twist. The burner phone, dead but waiting, the key drive with its cracked casing, the passport stamped with a name that wasn't hers, and tucked at the bottom, a photograph of people she had once called her team, faces blurred by time but not by guilt. And as she sat on the floor staring at them, she felt 28 turn into 80 in her bones. All those years compressed, all that weight pressing down, because she had chosen to leave, but Phoenix meant no one truly left, not alive. And as if to confirm it, the burner phone buzzed for the first time in years, its screen glowing faintly in the dark, and a single message scrolled across, simple and cold. Report in. Phoenix has risen. The letters burned into her, undoing all the walls she had built. And Claire realized then that she had no choice, that hiding had only ever been an illusion, because the past didn't care if you were young, tired, or broken. It only cared that you were still breathing, and if you were still breathing, you were still theirs. The glow of the burner phone seemed impossibly bright in the small dark apartment, casting long, trembling shadows across the bare walls, and Claire sat frozen on the floor, knees pulled up, her breath uneven as she read the message again and again. Report in. Phoenix has risen, each word hammering against the fragile illusion she had spent 3 years building, because she knew exactly what it meant, what it had always meant, and no amount of greasy plates, tired shifts, or anonymity could protect her from it now. And as the rain pressed harder against the window, she felt that familiar weight in her chest, the one she had carried when waiting for orders in safe houses far from home. Only now it felt heavier because she was no longer Dragonfly at 22, reckless and fast. She was 28, slower, burdened, worn down by ghosts and guilt. But she also knew enough to understand that Phoenix didn't care. Phoenix devoured past and present alike. And once invoked, there was no negotiation, only inevitability. So she reached for the shoebox, dragging it onto the table with shaking hands, and dumped it out, staring at the artifacts of a life she had sworn off. The burner phone buzzing like a trapped insect, the passport bearing a name she barely remembered answering to, the cracked key drive holding secrets she once promised to guard with her life, the photograph of faces she would never see again except in dreams that left her waking in sweat. And for a moment she just sat there, her chest tightening as she touched each item, wondering if this was fate punishing her for daring to believe she could escape, or if she had been fooling herself all along. Because in the end, maybe she was never really Claire the dishwasher, maybe. She had always been Dragonfly hiding in plain sight, waiting for the day the call would come. And that thought filled her with a hollow grief so sharp it almost broke her, because she realized then that she had been living on borrowed time, a ghost in her own life, and the past had finally come to collect. So she forced herself to breathe, forced her hands steady, and powered the burner fully, watching the screen flare alive with fragments of code. Old contacts blinking like faint stars in a long-dead sky. And as her thumb hovered over the keys, her body betrayed her, muscle memory rushing back, the training she thought had dulled flooding through her veins, sharpening her senses, reminding her how to move, how to anticipate, how to vanish. And it terrified her how natural it felt, as though the years of silence had been nothing more than an interlude. And when she finally typed the 2 words she had sworn never to let herself write again, Dragonfly active, her hands shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. But the reply came within seconds, too quick, too clean, proof that someone had been waiting, watching, hoping, and it read, "Welcome back. Coordinates incoming." Her stomach knotted, her breath faltered, and then the screen lit with numbers, a set of coordinates etched into her memory before she even finished reading. Because she knew the place, had been there before, years ago, when Phoenix was nothing but whispered contingency, a warehouse on the city's outskirts used as a dead drop, a place she thought abandoned. But seeing it again made her chest burn, her body remembering more than her mind wanted to. And she pressed her palms to her eyes, trying to will it away, trying to imagine she could just toss the phone out the window, ignore the text, crawl back into her bed, and pretend it was all a nightmare. But she knew better, knew that Phoenix didn't request, it demanded. And ignoring it didn't mean freedom, it meant destruction. Because if Dragonfly didn't rise to meet the call would come for her and everyone around her. And the thought of the cook joking in the diner, of the waitress walking her kids home, of the nameless customers sipping coffee in safety they didn't even know was fragile, made her stomach twist harder, because she had seen what happened when Phoenix cleared obstacles. She had seen towns flattened, people erased, and she couldn't allow that blood to soak her hands again. Not when she had the chance to step forward first. So she slid the phone into her palm, rose unsteadily, and began moving on instinct, pulling the knife from the box, slipping it into her jacket pocket, retrieving the cracked key drive she hadn't touched since her last mission and tucking it into the lining, grabbing the passport though she hated the weight of its false name. And she caught her reflection in the darkened window, her face thinner than she remembered, older than 28 should look, her eyes hard but haunted. And for a moment she felt split down the middle, half of her still clutching to the fragile threads of Claire Donovan, dishwasher, invisible, and the other half rising from the ashes, Dragonfly, the operative who knew how to walk into fire and not come out the same. And she whispered to herself, as though trying to convince her reflection, one last time. But the words felt hollow even as they left her lips, because she knew there was never a last time with Phoenix. Only cycles, only fire and rebirth. And the ache of that realization nearly buckled her knees. But then the phone buzzed again, sharper now, more urgent, and the message glowed. "Clock is ticking. Move." And just like that, the choice was ripped from her, hesitation no longer an option, and she grabbed her jacket, zipped it against the rain, slipped the phone into her pocket, and stood in the doorway of the only home she had allowed herself to build, looking once at the dishes in the sink, the uniform draped on the chair, the life she had cobbled together from fragments of anonymity, and she let herself feel the grief of losing it, the grief of knowing she would never step back into this space as the same woman again. But she didn't cry, because Dragonfly didn't cry. She burned, she rose, and she moved. And so she stepped into the hallway, the air heavy with shadows, every sound amplified, every instinct alive again. And as she locked the door behind her and walked into the storm, she knew the reckoning had begun, and the world would soon remember her name, whether she wanted it or not.